The Death of Robin Hood is directed by Michael Sarnoski, and it serves as a dark, gritty reimagining of the legendary tale of old. If you're expecting the classic Robin Hood depicted throughout the countless stories and many, many adaptations, you'll quickly discover that this film has little interest in previous versions that you've seen before. This is not a tale about a heroic thief stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. Instead, it presents Robin as a deeply flawed and often brutal man whose life has been defined by violence. The film makes that clear almost immediately. I mean, within the opening minutes, Robin commits an act that would feel unthinkable for many interpretations of the character, establishing the tone for everything that then follows. Throughout the film, he routinely finds himself confronted by the consequences of his actions, whether through the families, friends, or loved ones of those he has killed. There is something oddly poetic about the cycle of violence. Robin has spent a lifetime creating suffering, and as the title suggests, the death of Robin Hood ultimately becomes a story about a man forced to reckon with the legacy that he leaves behind. This is also a deliberately slow-paced film. The director, Michael Sarnoski, takes his time exploring Robin's psyche amidst the tone and gorgeous backdrops of Northern Ireland, where much of the cinematography of this film takes place. Some viewers may find the pacing challenging, particularly if they are expecting a more traditional action-adventure film. However, when the violence does arrive, it is sudden, it's brutal, and often difficult to watch. The film never glamorizes Robin's heroic actions. Instead, it presents violence as something ugly, painful, and oddly inescapable for the legend that is Robin Hood, while removing the heroism altogether, apart from one specific act that I'll get to a bit later. While the first half of the movie is rather violent, and it doesn't take very long for that violence to make itself known, the second half, on the other hand, shifts dramatically in tone. Much of it unfolds in quieter, more isolated setting, where the chaos that once defined Robin's life is replaced by long stretches of reflection and stillness. As an audience, and especially given the title, The Death of Robin Hood, we're conditioned to expect some grand climatic end, a final battle, one last act of heroism, a bloody confrontation worthy of the legend himself. Instead, the film forces us to sit in this silence alongside Robin. The peace and quiet almost become a form of torment, both for him and for us, as we continue waiting for the inevitable violence to return. Technically speaking, this feels entirely deliberate and a bold choice. By slowing the pace and stripping away the action, the film denies both Robin and the audience the comfort of distraction. The quiet forces him to confront the consequences of his life in a way that another sword fight never could. It also reinforces one of the film's central ideas: legends may die in spectacular fashion in stories, but human beings often face death in far less dramatic circumstances. The tension comes not from wondering if Robin will die, but from watching him grapple with the reality that his end may not resemble the many grand legends that made him famous to begin with. One issue I did have with the film was the audio mix. During portions of the first act, dialogue occasionally felt difficult to understand, with certain lines coming across as mumbled or just buried beneath muffled dialogue. While this issue became less noticeable as the film progressed, or perhaps maybe I became more used to it by the time the second act of the film took place, it was distracting enough early on that it occasionally pulled me out of the experience. With that being said, this is probably a film that you'd want to watch with subtitles so as to not miss out on what is being said, especially during the early portions of the film. What I found most interesting about The Death of Robin Hood is how little it seemed concerned with preserving the mythology of its central character. Rather than celebrating Robin Hood as this legendary folk hero who has been romanticized for centuries, the film actively strips away much of what audiences traditionally associate with him. There are no grand speeches about justice, no triumphant victories against tyranny, and very little of the adventures that have come to define the character in popular culture. Instead, the film asks much more uncomfortable questions. What kind of man would someone like Robin Hood actually become after a lifetime of violence? What if the hero was less a champion of the people and more a ruthless outlaw? What if the stories passed down through generations had softened the truth? And what if the legends were little more than lies, reshaped by time, retold by those who needed a hero rather than the flawed man who actually existed? Arguably, the only heroic act Robin commits in the entire film is choosing not to take a life. Throughout the story, we watch him kill countless people. The film never shies away from the consequences of that violence, nor does it attempt to frame every death as righteous or even necessary. In fact, much of the film seems dedicated to showing how normalized killing has become for Robin and his partner in crime, Little John. For most interpretations of Robin Hood, heroism is defined through his actions. He steals from the rich, he fights corrupt authorities, he protects the vulnerable. Here, however, heroism is found in the exact opposites. It emerges not through violence, but through the refusal to continue it. The irony is that this version of Robin has spent much of his life solving problems with a blade and bow, yet the film suggests that even for someone so deeply defined by violence, the decision to take a life ultimately remains to be a choice. That idea lies at the heart of the film. In many respects, the death of Robin Hood presents life as the accumulation of choices made over time, with each decision leaving behind consequences that cannot simply be forgotten. As Robin approaches the end of his life, he is forced to confront the reality that the past is truly never buried. Eventually, our choices return to us, and the person we become is often determined by how we answer for them. This in turn becomes what Robin describes as a curse he bears. He is haunted by nameless faces, the people he killed, the families left behind, and the countless lives forever altered by his actions. The film suggests that violence does not end with death. It lingers, it spreads, it passes from one life to another, and Robin's curse is the realization that every life he took created consequences he could never fully see, and those consequences continue long after the act itself is over. And whether audiences embrace this interpretation will likely depend on what they want from a Robin Hood film. Those seeking a faithful adaptation of the classic tale may be disappointed by how far this version strays from the familiar mythology we have come to know. However, viewers willing to accept a darker and more introspective character study approach may find plenty to appreciate here. The Death of Robin Hood is not an easy film to watch, nor is it particularly interested in being entertaining in the traditional sense. Instead, it offers a bleak meditation on violence and legacy, anchored by a version of Robin Hood that feels less like a hero and more like a man haunted by the lives he's taken. It challenges the romanticized image of the outlaw that audiences have embraced for generations and replaces it with something far more bleak: a man nearing the end of his life, burdened by his past and unable to escape the consequences of it. Whether you ultimately enjoyed the film or not, it's a fascinating interpretation of a character who is rarely allowed to be this vulnerable, this flawed, or this violent. As always, thanks for watching. Let me know what you liked or disliked about The Death of Robin Hood in the comments below, and let me know what other films you'd like me to talk about next. Until next time, this has been Film Sense with Brian. I'll catch you around on the next video.